Ask the Coach 24 with executive coach and business mentor Nick Sellers. How you doing, Nick?
Very well, Andrew. Thank you for asking. Very well.
Excellent. Nick, we've been through what feels like a very turbulent year, both from a political perspective and also within the business environment. It's starting to feel like acting with a lack of integrity has become more acceptable, even amongst senior leaders and public figures. In this week's Ask the Coach, I wanted to explore with you why integrity still matters, even when it feels like so many around us aren't prioritising it. Why should we continue to act with integrity, and how can we shape our careers and environments we work with? So Nick, first thing I wanted to ask you, can you define what integrity means to you?
Yeah, I think one of the best descriptions, explanations of integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. And that, when I saw that had been attributed to C.S. Lewis. That may not be accurate, but it just seems to me that, we might be inclined to do the right thing when we've got an audience. Sometimes we might be inclined to continue on a path that's doing the wrong thing because we don't think anybody can see it. But as we've seen this year, there have been plenty of cases where the wrong thing looks like it's been done and then it comes to light. And for me, it seems as though people acted on their own agenda and not with any integrity.
Yeah, it seems to be happening more and more, and especially with public figures. So just taking it back to the workplace, Nick, why do you think acting with integrity is so crucial in the workplace, even when it feels often or sometimes that others around you aren't doing the same?
Right. I think in the workplace, really, you can't have anything cohesive and positive happening unless there's an environment of trust and confidence. And I actually think that the foundation for trust and confidence is integrity. I think when people know that we are willing and able to do the right thing, that we act in the right way, then actually confidence and trust flow from that. And from confidence and trust comes progress. So for me, I think if we apply it in the workplace, it's because it gives us some of those fundamentals of trust and confidence.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sure we've been in situations, both of us, Nick, where you've seen people not act with integrity around about you and been rewarded for it. But I've always felt that from a long-term perspective, if you continue to act with integrity, the long-term benefits outweigh any short-term negatives. What in your mind, Nick, is the best approach to play the long game, or to take some of the quick wins that you see people getting rewarded with sometimes in the workplace?
It's a really good question, Andrew, and I think for me, my observation over the years has been that people do appear to get quick wins when they, let's say, fudge the numbers or tell something in a way that it didn't really happen. But the truth does come out. And I think if we act individually with integrity as far as we can do, we're not perfect. So we will make mistakes. We might well be persuaded to do something that isn't, as right as it could be. And I don't make any excuse for that. I think acting with integrity is about doing the right thing. But where people don't act with integrity and where they do kind of spin a yarn, tell a tale, fudge the numbers, it comes to light, and it can have some not serious consequences, like it might stall a career, or it can have extremely serious consequences in that it might lead to prosecution and worse. So I think acting with integrity is about playing the long game. It is about developing a personal profile, a personal reputation, and then people migrate towards you, because the great majority of people would rather work with somebody who does have integrity than with somebody who doesn't.
Absolutely. Do you think there's organisations who actively encourage cultures of integrity, and there's organisations who discourage integrity? Do you think that can be endemic within an organisation, Nick, or is that down to individuals?
It's possible. Again, my observation is that there are some cultures which are very, I think I'll call them ambitious, where they're going for very high growth, where they're going for record sales, and that kind of thing, or they're trying to deliver profits which are maybe not realistic for the organization to deliver. And so it could be that there's a culture there of something which is so ambitious that it leads to a kind of a dog eat dog environment where integrity kind of becomes questionable, maybe even goes out of the window. In pursuit of the numbers, in pursuit of the goal, it doesn't matter how we get there. That normally leads to a problem. I'm thinking back on some ancient classic cases, Enron in the States, where, that was a massive organization that just got bigger and bigger and bigger very quickly, but actually there was no structure there, there was no foundation, there was nothing that was real about it. And so it ended up collapsing, and a lot of people were hurt and burned as a result.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll give a real life example, Nick, that I used to come up with against quite a lot. So in recruitment, and thankfully I've never worked for one of these organisations, I would wholeheartedly say the organisations I work with don't promote, they've always promoted integrity, thankfully, but quite a common practice in recruitment, or certainly used to be, I'm not sure if it still is now, is that people used to do two things. They used to ask candidates what other positions they're applying for, and they used to take references on those candidates, knowing full well they didn't have a job for them. And the two reasons they do it is essentially lead generation. So if they knew you were applying for X, Y, Z companies, they could go and take other candidates to those companies, and they would take references on a candidate in order to speak to other hiring managers. Now, it never sat right with me, but I know there are probably still recruitment agencies that train people in that practice, because ultimately it is effective, it does work. I think it's short-sighted, but it does lead to revenue generation.
Yeah.
So I'm always a bit torn in these things. It's something that's effective. It's a common practice within some organisations. It's actively promoted within some organisations, but to me it feels wrong. But I've always been torn in that you're disadvantaging yourself by not using some of the less ethical practices that other companies are using. What would your thoughts be on? That's just one example. There's lots of examples like that within business, but what are your thoughts on examples like that?
We're all different. The big question I would probably ask somebody who was considering acting in that way was, are you prepared to live with the consequences? Because there are always consequences for decisions that we take. And I think where we pursue, lack of integrity usually means cutting corners. And so rather than doing the hard yards to actually do the lead generation in that kind of example, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take advantage of information that comes our way, and we're going to cut corners. We're going to get to an end point quicker than might legitimately be the case that we ought to do that. Are we prepared to live with the consequences? Will our conscience speak to us? And also, will our reputation stand up? Because where somebody acts in a way that lacks integrity for too long, then their reputation becomes tarnished, their profile is diminished. And then who trusts them? Who has confidence in them? They may be a person that's got bags and bags of ability, but if they don't have integrity, then who can really actually engage with them and trust them? Actually, Andrew, there's one other point. You mentioned the word disadvantaged when you were asking that question about acting with integrity. And I just wanted to say this, that when we think about the word disadvantaged, it can kind of sound like totally missing out. It can sound like an all or nothing. It's a bit like the word failure that we use sometimes. Failure is an absolute word. It's not really kind of like total loss. It can actually just be that maybe we didn't quite reach the point that we hoped to. And it's the same with the word disadvantage. Now, acting with integrity might well see other people overtake us or reach the finish line before we do. But the methods that they adopt in reaching that finish line, in getting to the point that they have, may have consequences. And that was what we talked about a little while ago, that there are consequences to the decisions that we take, to the corners that we cut. So we might fear being disadvantaged, but disadvantage is not an absolute term. It might just be that we end up coming at a point, but we've got there by the right means.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, Nick. I think that's an excellent point. So someone finds themselves in an organisation or within a team or reporting into a manager where their integrity's put at odds with the environment. What should they do? Should they raise it or should they walk away? What's your advice, Nick?
I think going back to that definition that we used at the beginning of the conversation, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. I feel as though we should maintain our standards. We shouldn't lower our standards to merge in with everybody around us. If we work in a team that lacks integrity, maybe we need to figure out a way that we can maintain our integrity, but also protect our integrity as well. So don't give up, don't compromise. And there may come a point where, as an individual, we decide that we cannot carry on in the culture that we find ourselves, in which case we either walk away or we try to change the culture. Now, changing the culture of a team that you do not own can be quite hard. But if you've got the legs for it, if you've got the stamina for it, it's absolutely something that you can start to work on. You can start to treat it as a project. People notice more than they talk about. So if you act with integrity, the people around you will know that you are acting with integrity. They may not choose to join you. They may not say to you, I know that you act with integrity, but they will see. And there will come a point where it can be verbalized, where it can be talked about. It might be that colleagues actually say about Andrew that, he's a great guy. He always does what he says he's going to do. Or we know that we can trust Andrew, or things like that. And those are the kinds of comments that show that actually the message is getting across, even if they're not living by it.
Absolutely, yeah. What role does integrity play, do you think, Nick, in building trust and credibility if you're a leader of a team or a
Right.
manager?
Well, if you think about, leadership is a lot of it is about setting an example. And so a leader that doesn't act with integrity is unlikely to lead a team that operates on the basis of integrity. We've talked about communication. No, we didn't talk about communication. We talked about trust and confidence. If you can't trust the boss, who are you going to trust? You'll maybe start trusting the people around you. But if they don't trust the boss either, then what happens next is you end up with a division. There's the boss who's leading, but actually isn't living by an example that can be followed. And then you've got a team which is actually probably more deciding their own agendas and doing a lot of back chat and conversation that they don't want the boss to be party to. If we are going to act as leaders with integrity, there will be openness, there will be trust, there will be confidence. And what integrity does is it develops an environment, an atmosphere where people feel as though they can voice concerns without being shouted down, that they can share observations without somebody else stealing their idea, those kinds of things. So, integrity from the front, lead from the front, but also instill it in the team that when we act with integrity, we can work well together.
Mm-hmm. I think occasionally when I've seen leaders in organisation I've worked for, like Nick, when I've questioned their integrity, they usually talk a good game, but it's their actions that don't marry up to the way they present themselves. So they may, for example, talk about working hard and they want to drive the team forward, work hard, but they're always the last one in and first one out of the office. And they'll say, well, I'm the boss, I can do that, or I'm the manager, I've got that flexibility, whereas the team doesn't, and they wouldn't expect that of the team, but they would preach like hard work and putting extra time in at the end of the day and the start of the day, whereas they never have those actions themselves. Now, that's a very small thing that's not a huge impact on integrity, but that would be the kind of action I think is fairly common that leaders can do that I think puts their team at odds with their image of how they may see themselves from an integrity perspective. Have you come across that, Nick, in your career?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind there, Andrew. The first one is that a leader that acts with integrity isn't going to expect that the team is going to work longer hours than he or she does. They're going to look after the team. They're going to make sure that nobody's burning the candle at both ends. Except that there will be, life's not all plain sailing. There will be occasions when everybody needs to sort of like pull on the oars together and get to a deadline on time. But habitually, the boss will not do different to the rest of the team. So that's the first thing I would observe. The second thing is, as an example, somebody once said to me, "What does this person need to say to regain your confidence?" And my reply was, "I don't think he should say anything. I'd like to see what he does." And that is borne out by your comment that actions speak louder than words, that people can say stuff but then do something different. I actually think we can see by people's actions just exactly where they're coming from.
Do you think people are blindsided by that, Nick, or is that something people understand and intentionally go ahead with regardless?
Yeah, I think critical thinking is something that we really need to develop as leaders. We need to be able to look at situations and think critically about what is going on here and not just accept the narrative. Don't just accept what people say. See where it fits into the plan. See where it fits into reaching the goal. So yeah, I think we need to actually all think much more critically than we do. And I don't mean critical thinking as in criticizing others, but just thinking things through. Spend some time to reflect on what's been said, what's been done, and figure out whether it fits in with your set of values, with your set of goals.
Yeah, I think it can be challenging as well, Nick. Sometimes I'll hear myself saying something or I'll do something in front of staff and I'll think retrospectively, gosh, how does that project onto them? Is that the right thing I should be saying or doing? Does that, nothing terrible, but does that question my integrity or my work ethic in front of staff? And it's very difficult to be 100% all the time. But it is easy also to be blindsided and to let that slip. And it's probably common, and I'd imagine happens unintentionally from time to time with most leaders. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Vulnerability is a key attribute of good leaders, willing to be vulnerable. And one way that can manifest itself is in an example like you just gave, where maybe you said something, you were a bit sharp with somebody, maybe you misled them, not intentionally or even intentionally. But integrity would lead you to go and correct the situation, not to just let it run. Integrity would be the thing that would have you go back to that person and say, "Look, I'm really sorry what I said. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. I didn't mean to cause you any insult." Or and actually another thing about that I would say is, if that comment was made in front of 10 other people, go and make the apology in front of those same 10 people. What's said publicly needs to be corrected publicly and not privately. Anything that's said privately can be corrected privately. I think that's what integrity would lead us to do.
That's a good point, Nick. Yeah, I've never thought about it like that, but I think that's a great point. Are there any practical habits or daily actions you can recommend, Nick, to ensure that we consistently act with integrity, even in small ways?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a great advocate, as you know, of journaling. So what journaling does is it kind of forces us, if that's the right word, to actually sit down and reflect. We write out things that have happened to us over the last 24 hours, things that we've got coming along and how we prepare for them. Journaling forces us to think. And part of that thinking and reflecting is actually on, well, where did I put a foot wrong? What could I have done better? And that, I think, actually helps drive up the level of integrity with which we act. As I said earlier in the conversation, we're none of us perfect. We do make mistakes. And sometimes we find ourselves under pressure to do something that doesn't sit well with us. And I think that reflecting on it through maybe journaling or something like that, through conversations with others, can actually just kind of ratchet up the standards by which we're holding ourselves accountable from month to month.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the common misconceptions you've seen or heard across your career, Nick, that might discourage people from prioritising integrity in their careers?
I think you mentioned one earlier about being disadvantaged. Um, we might feel as though we're not going to get to where we ought to get to or where we want to get to if we act with integrity. And I would maybe ask the question, why is it important with us to reach that goal if it means that we've got to compromise on something like integrity? Why is it more important for us to reach that promotion, achieve that promotion, or achieve that salary level, or achieve that commission? Why is that so important that we would actually do it in a way which lacks integrity? Because integrity typically harms someone else. It harms someone else. It could be that by cutting a corner, we've stolen a part of somebody's reputation. By cutting a corner, we've actually got a payment that we ought not to have got. By cutting a corner and acting without integrity, we've actually been recognized for something we didn't do. And the big question comes back to, like, can we live with those consequences? Some people will shrug it off and say, yeah, I'm quite happy. As long as I get the money, I'm okay. But I think life has a tendency to teach us lessons as we go along. And if we get caught, then we may get fired. And if we get fired, what does that look like on the CV? What would it mean in terms of the reference we got from a previous employer? What would it mean to the people that are around us? Because when we lack integrity, it's not just about us, it's about those that are near and dear to us as well. So it could affect, a loved one, it could affect family and friends. So, yeah, I could probably keep going on that one. That was a really good question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've stayed off the topic, Nick, but something that's been drifting about on my mind throughout our conversation and on this topic is we talked about being a turbulent year within politics, and I try and stay away from politics. I don't particularly engage with it or enjoy it. However, I think it's blatantly obvious now that typically, politicians don't act with integrity and that they will say one thing and do completely another. I think that's a good example where clearly it doesn't pay to act with integrity because there's no expectation to deliver on your manifesto if you're a politician these days. So what kind of environment does that create and what kind of people is that going to attract into politics? And maybe you disagree with that, Nick, completely. So by all means, correct me.
No. It's interesting actually because for me, I could kind of say that maybe politicians sadly get dropped into the same bucket as the old-fashioned second-hand car salesman. That would sell you a banger and you'd get it off the forecourt before everything fell apart, but you weren't covered under the warranty anymore. Sadly, there are in the UK in the Westminster Parliament 600 and something MPs. I'm not sure what the number is in Scotland, but when you think about the high profile cases that there have been over the recent years that have affected Westminster, that have affected Holyrood, there are some decisions, there are some actions that have been taken that have left the reputation and career of some politicians in tatters. Now, why did they do it? Were they intent on just getting their point across? Were they intent on getting into power? What was it that drove them, and what was it that meant that they didn't stick to that definition of integrity as being the right thing, even when no one's watching? If I use an example from Westminster, the Partygate thing was a bit of a shock. Everybody's locked down, but at number 10, there are garden parties going on or whatever it is. What does that tell us? Does it tell us that the pandemic wasn't as serious as we were all being told by the Prime Minister and by his advisors and by the media? Or what does it tell us? It tells us something. Things are not aligned. And that's what usually comes to light when integrity is lacking. We think about, accusations made towards the SNP leadership. And it's easy because these are high profile figures. And when things come to light, the media's all over it and everybody wants to know. I guess where I'm going with this is that wouldn't it be a marvellous thing if every elected member acted with absolute integrity, showed respect for others and worked together instead of just simply opposing? wouldn't it be a marvellous thing? I'm sure that economically, society would be in a much different place.
Yeah, that would be amazing, Nick. I think, unfortunately, it's unlikely to happen just due to human nature and the way dynamics work in politics, probably. But Partygate would be a good example and would be something that came to mind where politicians would say, do as I say, not as I do, and they go a complete contrast to what they're asking everybody else to do, suggesting, like you say, that they either don't think it's as serious as they say it is, and then you question why would that be, or they just paid lip service to their own advice. But either way, I think there's a strong mistrust, and I think politics is an extreme example. I think probably there's a lot more trust in most workplaces than there would be in politics. I suspect, certainly, I've never worked anywhere where I've had any significant trust issues with the people around about me, not to the degree I would have if I worked in Westminster, that's for sure.
Yeah. Maybe if I could give you another example of what I hope is an example of integrity, and it kind of takes us away from Parliament and it takes us into the workplace. So as employees, we might incur an expense on behalf of the company. And so we put our expense claim in and we get paid back by the company for that expense. Say a month later, a credit came through from the company that we purchased something because there was a discount available or something like that, and we ended up getting half of the money back again. Do we go and tell the company about that? I did that when I used to travel a lot. I used to have quite a lot of expenses, thousands of pounds every month. And there was one journey I undertook where, because the train was late arriving, there was a refund, 20% refund given by, I think it was LNER, on a trip to London. And I put that credit through on my expenses and gave the money back to the company. And somebody in the finance department noticed it and made a comment. That was honest of you. Now, it wasn't a lot of money, and maybe if it was a larger money, it would hopefully wouldn't have tempted me to do the wrong thing. But the fact is, it was just as easy for me to give the money back to the company through expenses as it had been for me to take the money. But what it did is it has an impact on other people. They notice that honesty, they notice that integrity. And so I would always say, act with integrity whenever you can.
Absolutely, no, I agree. An example I've had recently with a couple of professionals, with it being the catalyst for them looking to leave jobs, has purely been down to, so in both examples, they were due to leave the company, they were counter offered in the current job, promised XYZ, nothing crazy, promised a small pay rise, and promised some changes in the working environment, which they agreed to. However, after accepting the offer, and this is two very recent examples, but there's been hundreds over the years, after accepting that counter offer, they stayed with the organisation. The organisation thought, great, that person stayed. We don't need to deliver on what we've said we will. They'll stay with us now. And in both examples, I've had conversations 6 months apart, roughly 6 months apart with them, and they're both ready to leave because there's been no change in the work environment, no attempted change. The lines of communication that were open while that person was potentially about to leave have now closed because the company's not that interested anymore now the person's staying with them. The promised salary increases haven't materialised, and essentially what's happened there is the company or the individual who's promised them those things hasn't acted with any integrity, and that's been picked up upon, noticed, and now they're going to lose staff members through it. And it's such a simple thing, and I know it's probably just another example of promising something that's not being delivered.
I think it's a really good example of where, in order to keep somebody in the business, a promise is made of change. The promise isn't fulfilled. Integrity is lacking. In the eyes of the person who was thinking of leaving, the brand is tarnished, the reputation is tarnished. If that kind of information was to leak out into a public domain, it could be that the brand and the reputation are tarnished publicly. And for what reason? You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to be really bright to figure out that when you make a promise to somebody that you subsequently don't deliver on, that there's going to be a consequence to that. And the consequence is maybe you maintained employment with them for a few more months, but actually it didn't count for anything.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's common. I think companies generally are a lot better at recruiting people than they are at putting the same effort into retaining them. So I think it's fairly common, but also often it does fall down to issues of integrity and things that have been promised that are not delivered.
Can I
It's
can I just
common.
add one more? Can I just add one more thing to that, though, Andrew? And it's this: that sometimes we do intend to do something, we do promise to do something. It might have been in a case like that there was the intent to pay somebody more or make a change in the organisation or something. That this person is now staying and we've promised to do this. It can sometimes be difficult or impossible for the promise to be delivered on. But in that case, we shouldn't be stringing people out. We should actually be explaining why. We're not always, as leaders, as companies, we're not always in control of everything.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Nick, because in both the recent examples I'm given, it was a case where the directors were very open door while they were about to leave. Can I help? Can I do anything? Can I speak to you? Can we have a chat? The minute that decision's been made to stay, suddenly they're not available. They don't want to talk. So there hasn't been that open, honest communication,
right?
Which I think has been the main issue. And they can see the contrast, and it's led them to say, well, it's definitely time to make a move, which is understandable. But so Nick, how can organisations foster a culture where integrity is valued and rewarded?
I think integrity kind of does go hand in hand with openness, communication. And communication's a two-way thing, and there's different components to communication. Listening is as much a communication skill as articulating things. So I think for integrity to thrive in an organization, there has to be openness, honesty, there has to be communication, there has to be a willingness to actually work together on things and not just, you know, delegate, micromanage somebody. We've got to draw out the best in people, and I don't think that comes with some styles of management. It may well be that you get across the finish line, you might meet a deadline, but if you leave people kind of feeling burned and bruised and all that kind of stuff behind you, then you've not acted with integrity, and actually the culture is not a helpful one. So hopefully that answers your question, Andrew.
Great points, Nick. And then lastly, what would you say to someone who feels disillusioned because they see others around about them succeeding despite a lack of integrity?
I would say ask yourself the question why you're disillusioned. Comparison is a very dangerous thing. It's good for us to compare ourselves with others in terms of attainment. If somebody has reached a promotion, reached a salary level, that's maybe not a bad thing for us to be aware of, that kind of comparison. But if we compare how they did it with how we might be prepared to act, that could be something that if we adopt their tactics to achieve that goal, then we may be acting out of line with our own values. And that starts to create friction for us internally. So I would say ask yourself the question why you're disillusioned, why you're disappointed. Is it because you're not achieving through honest means what they're achieving through dishonest? Or is it because of some other reason? And maybe don't set the same goals as other people do as well. Figure out what goals you want to set for yourself that you can live with, ones that are achievable to you. It might be that somebody's had a stratospheric climb, but they might have hit where they've hit and then actually come down just as quickly. Whereas somebody taking the longer, more steady route to the top may find that actually they remain at the top for a lot longer. So I think being purposeful, being thoughtful about it, and don't allow the disillusionment to stop you doing what you want to do, but just figure out for you what the right route is.
Mm. I'm going to ask you a really tricky question, Nick. I know I said the last one was the last one, but I think something I've thought about over the years is integrity. Is it inherent? Is it something that we learn from a young age, or is it something we learn later in life? Is it something that we're born with, or is it something we develop or lose throughout our careers through lived experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Andrew. I think there'll probably be others that are better qualified than me to sort of answer that. But my observation would be is that if we use that statement, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. I think it's actually a standard that we adopt, and so there may be times in our life and circumstances in our life that we recognize that we did not act with integrity, and we might want to do better the next time. We might realize that there are actually rewards for acting with integrity. And so it's not just about us kind of balancing the odds and sort of saying, if I do this, that might happen, but if I do this, then I'm bound to get. It's about actually identifying with what the rewards of integrity bring. And it might be that the reward of being able to live with ourselves with a clear conscience far outweighs any of the other things, the other benefits that come of acting without integrity.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated subject, Nick. Talk about it all day. Is it learned? Is it through lived experience? Can it be changed? Can it be developed? I don't know, but I think, just lastly, Nick, just want you to summarise why you think integrity is key in the workplace or to have a successful career. I don't know, it's a tricky one again to summarise, but just a few words.
I think integrity for me is about working to a standard. It's about achieving a certain acceptable quality of work. It's about applying ourselves. It's kind of like being full on rather than half hearted. I think there's a lot of words I could associate with integrity. And I think for me, I've sold my time to the company in return. I've sold my hours in return for a salary. And so if I act with integrity, then I'm going to give the company something in return for the money that they give to me. And I've sold, the best of me to them for the 40 hours a week or so that I work. And I think that that's not an unfair trade. I sometimes hear people complaining about the hourly rate that they get paid, but we've all got the option to be able to change employer and go for a higher hourly rate if that's what's important. But there are other benefits to working in an environment like a company. There might be a great culture, there might be great people that we work with, there might be exciting projects that we work on. And I think if we bring integrity to what we do in the workplace, then I think actually there's satisfaction that comes in return to that.
Absolutely. Fascinating, Nick, and great insight. I really appreciate your time again, and hopefully you'll join me next week.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Andrew. I've enjoyed this one. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.